Okay, good evening, folks, and welcome back to Migweek 2021. Thanks for tuning in. This is our third talk of 5 during this week. We've already had 2 really cracking talks from David LaPuma and Johnny Rankin, but this is the first talk this evening, which is about featuring a local boy done good, adopted local boy done good, which we'll come on to in a second. Just to get some boring stuff, or rather a recap. It's not that boring, actually, looking at what happened today. There was a fantastic arrival of birds. We seem to time it really well during Migweek. Obviously, that's the idea, but it's happened for us really fantastically in the last few years. Today was a day of a huge redwing arrival. 5 figures arrived on Flamborough Head. Incredible scenes. So I hear I was part of the some of us have to work grumpy brigade, but I enjoyed hearing about it vicariously. Also lots of other stuff: bramblings, field fairs, goldcrests, hooper swans, lots of pink-footed geese. It was, by all accounts, apparently a fantastic day, and lots of people have got in touch to say how happy they were and how much they enjoyed what's happened today. There were ringing demos, of course, at Filey and Flamborough. There were guided walks. There was a particularly successful guided walk from our dear friend Will and I believe Poppy this afternoon at Bempton, where a hell of a lot of people turned up, so I hear. And the first half of the walk was desperate, in Will's word. And then the second half of the walk, it rained redwings, pink-footed geese, goldcrest started appearing, field fairs, woodcock, all kinds of stuff. So whoever was on that walk clearly got the absolute kind of immersive migration experience of the Yorkshire coast. So thanks everybody on the ground for volunteering and leading walks and doing the ringers. They're just doing a great job. Thank you so much to the teams. Tomorrow, just to quickly kind of clue you in, there are ringing demos at Filey and Flamborough again in the mornings, guided walk at Flamborough. Our talk tomorrow evening is the Martin Garner inspirational talk from the wonderful Dawn Balmer, and that's called Keeping Track of Our Migratory Birds. So that'll be really fantastic. Same time, same place. If you're enjoying anything that's happening, or if you're going to enjoy anything that's happening this week, or if you just think we're doing a good job, please do donate, because as you know, it's all free and open to everybody, which is absolutely the ethos of Migweek. You can donate to our fantastic chosen charity, which is St. Catherine's Hospice. I don't think I know anybody locally who's not been positively affected and touched by St. Catherine's Hospice. And thank you to everybody who's donated so far. But if you want to donate, it's justgiving.com/Migweek21. That's justgiving.com/Migweek21, all one word. If you want to look at the program to see what's happening over the next few days, we're only halfway through, and it seems like there's been a hell of a lot going on in lots of exciting ways already. But the program is on the Flamborough Bird Observatory website. So that's flamboroughbirdobs.org.uk, or just Google Flamborough Bird Observatory to get the latest information. Right, well, I've got my window open and I've got my recorder set. Sadly, that's not for you, Keith. It's for the redwings that are arriving as we speak outside my study window. But you will be recorded on it nonetheless as a kind of a secondary thing. Really, really happy to have Keith with us this evening, especially seeing as he's under the weather. He's got a bit of man flu, and we're really glad that he's been able to do it. We really appreciate it, doubly appreciate it, Keith. Thank you so much. So we're going to be gentle with him. Bear that in mind, folks, as we're going along. Keith's he may not fit as a fiddle, but there you go, right on cue. He's a seething mess. For those of you who don't know Keith, this is Keith Clarkson, who is very much a bit of a legend in the birding world and in the conservation world. Keith, I've fortunately known Keith for many years, and he's helped and inspired me in various different ways. And I think I speak for many people where that's the case. He's been with the RSPB, was with the RSPB for many, many years in various roles. is a Sheffield native and was in Sheffield for many years. To basically cut to the chase, he moved to the East Coast some years ago, took a deliberate demotion in order to become the Bempton Cliffs site manager. And that was during my time up here as well. And I remember watching him kind of revolutionize Bempton Cliffs and the whole RSPB Bempton experience up there for the good. Since then, he's retired. 3 years, I think, Keith, is that right?
That's correct, Mark. Yeah.
3 years of desperately trying to adjust to not working 24/7. I know you too well. And of course, retirement for Keith means an all manner of projects and fantastic things going on. One of the biggest, which has been a huge part of his life throughout, is VisMig, visible migration, i.e. literally the study of birds migrating, being able to see them along flight lines. Keith's very much a pioneer of this, did it for many years in the Sheffield area, and has put Hunmanby Gap, an otherwise, quiet, tranquil little beach hamlet here in Filey Bay. He's put it on the map, on the global birding map, really, as one of the most fascinating and most productive visible migration sites, certainly on the east coast of the UK. I could go on and on. I won't. What I'll do is hand over to Keith now. Keith, this evening, he's not going to talk about VisMig. He's not going to talk about seabirds. So this is fascinating for me. I don't think I've ever seen you talk about anything else, mate. This evening's going to talk about it's going to talk about a year at Hunmanby Gap. So basically, the annual natural cycle of where Keith lives here at Hunmanby Gap. So without further ado, over to you, Keith. Thank you.
Many thanks, Mark. Just bear with me. Okay, here we go. So as Mark says, I'm not going to talk about visible migration. I'm not going to talk about seabirds. Instead, I'm going to talk about an antidote to migration, and that's the remarkable everyday wildlife that's all around us here at Hunmanby Gap. So without further ado, a big hello to all of you, and a quick fix as to where we are. Hunmanby Gap is situated at the head of Filey Bay, in the shadow of Filey Brig and Filey and Carnaze, and equally from the south, very much in the shadow of Flamborough. And therefore, if you want to see exotic rare migrants from across the sea, go to Filey and Flamborough, don't come to Hunmanby Gap. If you want to see migrants migrating through Britain, then come to Hunmanby Gap. But as I say, I'm not going to be talking about those tonight, but I will give you just a flavour of where I live, for those of you who don't know it. This is the view looking north from our house towards Filey and those twinkling lights at night, a magical sight. And looking to the south across the garden merges with the scrub woodland of Hunmanby Gap and onto the soft cliffs. And looking south, we're across the fields towards Reeton and Speeton Cliffs and Bempton Cliffs right there in the eastern corner. Absolutely fantastic to be able to literally look down on that incredible seabird colony and the sea. Hunmanby Gap Beach, where we visit every single day almost without fail now, is a mixed blessing, a place where people can come in their thousands on Sunday or a bank holiday day and enjoy themselves, and you can still find space, and a day where, when the people have gone home, you can find absolute solitude and completely magical place to be. And just to give you an idea of some of the different habitats and the location, we live at Hunmanby Gap itself on the Gap Road. We can walk from our garden down through the gap, through the woodland and the little gill, Reeton Gill, down to the beach, past the beach cafe, onto the beach itself, or we can walk along Gap Road into Gap Car Park Road, the Hunmanby Gap Car Park, and at the far end of that into Ethelwood, newly planted woodland, where we carry out most of our visible migration work. And then there's a whole series of little pools, ponds, golf courses, arable farmland, magnificent soft cliffs, which I'll mention more about, and that stunning beach and bay all around us. But to start off with, one of the things that struck me most when I moved to Hunmanby was the night sky, black skies over much of us, and just a staggering abundance of stars and planets, and a chance to just look at the constellations. And as winter approaches, then perhaps the most prominent constellation that you can see is Orion. And so looking from our house, from the sea watching observatory, and looking at Orion itself in front of us there, where you can see the belt and the sword of Orion, the hunter. And in the top left-hand corner, you can see an orange star. And that's what I used to know as Betelgeuse. And it's a huge star. And a friend of mine, Martin Gamble, rang me to say, when I talked about seeing this, he said, do you realise that that star stretches from the centre of the sun to Jupiter in its size? And I said to Martin, I said, no, I didn't realise that. That is unbelievable. And it is unbelievable, isn't it? It's just how extraordinary that, you know, we have these incredible scenes above us and in these black, dark skies. There's so much to see and discover. And when you think that virtually everything we see up there is in our galaxy, and there may be over 1 billion stars in our galaxy alone. And yet, if you locate Cassiopeia, and that's that fantastic W of stars that you can see in that night sky, and look just to the left with binoculars, or if you've got fantastic sharp eyesight, you can just see a little blurred disk. And it just looks like a slightly small blurred star. If you zoom in on that, that's Andromeda. And Andromeda is the nearest galaxy to our galaxy. And if you think everything else in the sky that you see is all within our galaxy, that's a repeat of it. Another billions of stars and billions of planets. And it just puts everything into perspective. And I just recommend to anybody, if you get that chance, to just get out there and just experience those clear, cool nights in that dark sky. It transforms everything. When you're there, just in daytime, choose your day carefully, because this year, at the start of lockdown, way back in February, we experienced, some of you remember this, Storm Darcy, way back in February. And it was a monster of a storm. It was, you could barely even stand up, and the sea was howling, and just the waves smashed against the cliffs at Bempton and Speed, producing sort of 100-foot waves, and just, I've never seen anything quite like it. And it was incredible. And after it all abated, the beach was like a scene of devastation. Jellyfish shrapnel just covered the beach. Jellyfish that had been washed into the bay and then smashed to pieces by the power of the storm. And it's incredible to think that these jellyfish are out there and they have the actual ability to rejuvenate themselves, to actually grow younger, which is just phenomenal itself when you think about it. But actually, against storms like Darcy, even ability to grow younger becomes irrelevant. And so many marine creatures suffered a horrible fate in that storm. And one of them was cuttlefish. And the cuttlefish actually thrive in the area around Flamborough and Filey and Hunmanby Gap, but you rarely see them, apart from evidence of them through the cuttlefish bones that get washed up when cuttlefish die. And after Storm Darcy, I did a small walk from Reeton Sands to Primrose Valley and counted over 2,000 cuttlefish bones, 2,000 cuttlefish that had perished in that storm, just on that small section of beach. Extraordinary that there's that many animals out there that we're completely oblivious of. Even more incredible in many ways was that just prior to Storm Darcy starting, there was a huge freeze across the continent. I remember Craig Thomas at Flamborough Bird Observatory did a walk around at Flamborough Headland and recorded 130 woodcock on a single walk, just flushing them as he walked along. And it was a staggering influx of woodcock from the continent. What happened over the next few days gave another side to the story. Because again, just walking that same little stretch of beach, over the next 5-6 days or so, a week, I picked up over 50 dead woodcock, just smashed in various forms, picked by gulls and other creatures, in the strand line on the beach, adults and juveniles alike. This had just been a massive exodus of woodcocks from all the sort of grounds in lowland Europe where they'd been wintering and feeding, pushed west, coming to Britain to find sanctuary and feeding areas, but sadly many not even making that crossing, given those terrible sort of conditions. And it wasn't just the birds that suffered and the cuttlefish, fish themselves that are so much at home in Filey Bay, flatfish, which are perhaps the commonest fish that we normally come across in the bay, just the sheer range of them. Plaice and flounder, very similar, but flounder with the hard ribs to the base of the fins. Dab with that wonderful little U shape on the lateral line, perhaps the commonest fish in Filey Bay. And turbot, the queen of the flatfish, the fish on the lower right. And if you look at them, first impression, they're all pretty similar. But if you notice that flounder, plaice, and dab are all facing right, turbot's facing left. They can actually, the flatfish actually have left or right-handed sided flatfish. And turbots are left-facing flatfish, and the others are right-facing flatfish. And incredibly, in the first few months of the flatfish's life, they just look like normal fish, young fish, completely normal shape. And then they settle down onto the seabed, and the whole body undergoes a transformation, and the eyes shuffle round in the body as it flattens and becomes the shape that we know of flatfish. And here they were on the beach, literally in their hundreds, washed ashore, dead, unfortunately. And searching through this storm debris was a whole new experience. It gave me an insight into the marine life that I'd never even witnessed before. And I'd absolutely recommend anybody walking down on that beach after a storm event with easterly winds, northerly winds, and just searching, just to give you an insight into a world we barely even know about. This staggering bluemouth rockfish, a beautiful fish I'd never seen before, a relatively deep sea fish with poisoned dorsal spines on its dorsal fin. Rare in these areas. It's if not a fish you would expect to see here. And there's only, to my knowledge, one sort of previous episode where a whole age cohort came out of the Norway deeps and moved across into the North Sea. And they were actually seen as far south as the Humber. And that, to my knowledge, that's the only record I can find of them. Another fish that turned up in the storm debris was Norway bullhead, a small fish like the little bullhead we used to find in streams when fishing in Castleton in the White Peak, but a marine version of it, slightly larger and slightly more aggressive looking, a serious predator. And again, more of a deeper sea fish, more expected on the Norwegian coast rather than down here on the east coast, but brought across presumably in the storm itself. A larger fish, which I'd never seen anything like it, like a catfish almost, with 3 barbels at the front of its head, nearly a foot long in length, a solid eel-like creature, the shore rockling. Other rocklings are found more locally, but I've never seen this one before. And again, exposed by the storm itself and the wreckage on the beach, along with this hake, a predatory fish. Just look at those feet. Tubular shape, narrow pointing body and fin structures, absolutely unmistakable, those big eyes. This is a serious predatory fish, a young one, and again pushed into these shallow waters by the storm, and a great insight. And then as we were walking around, we found this, and at first we just thought it was a fragment from a plastic toy. Turquoise, ridiculous turquoise blue, thick blubbery flesh, coarse tubercles and hard bony parts to it. What on earth was it? A bit of research revealed it was a juvenile lumpfish that had been damaged in the storm, ripped apart. But look at that creature, juvenile lumpfish, floating around the pelagic oceans, attached to seaweed with a sucker, waiting for the spring when the adult pairs move inshore. And I remember Ant at the Living Sea Centre actually finding a male lumpfish on one of the low tide rock pools, protectively guarding its eggs in a rock pool. And that's the only time you ever see them in these shallow waters. So to see this, even just this fragment, was an incredible sort of insight. And it wasn't just the fish that were being washed up, it was the actual egg cases. And as a child, I remember coming with my family to Scarborough for our annual holidays and walking on the beach and finding sort of egg cases, mermaids' purses we used to call them. And we just thought they were dogfish egg cases. It turns out that dogfish bear live young. And these are the egg cases of our smallest shark, the small spotted cat shark. And it was fantastic to find them. We also, though, in the storm wreckage, found a slightly larger one, a darker one. And this turns out to be the egg case of a nursehound cat shark. Much, much rarer here on the East Coast. Certainly not unheard of, but great to find evidence of breeding here. And even more remarkable for us was to find our first of several curled octopuses that we found washed up onto the beach. This one's still alive. And when I first saw it, I just assumed automatically it was going to be a common octopus, little knowing that common octopuses are actually quite rare here in the northeast coast, and that the curled octopus is our predominant octopus. Fantastic creature. And when you look at it more closely, you see that it's got a single row of suckers and tubercles along the arms, unlike the common octopus, which would have two. And the flesh has this incredible ability. Even when we're looking at it on the beach in a pool, its skin, as our shadow cast over it, would suddenly sort of flush red, dark red. And then as we walked away and the sun came back onto it, it would flush back white as the chromatophores, the coloured pigments, expand and move out, flush out or close in, depending on light shining on them, so they can become cryptic and camouflaged. We tried to rescue this one and put it back in the sea, but I suspect we were probably a bit too late in the day. But nevertheless, we appreciated that incredible insight. And the insight that went across the beach, the sheer variety and number of crabs was shocking, to be honest. There were so many of them, from velvet swimming crabs with their red devil eyes and broad swimming hind feet on the left, to young edible crabs, the pointed long antennae and front claws of a mass crab, shore crabs, and then the long-clawed squat lobsters, which I was told afterwards are absolutely delicious. Why on earth didn't I eat them? A bit late in the day to find that out. And the sheer variety of shells, and just one shell stood out from all the others. These wonderfully named and perfectly named Pharaoh's sunset sun. It's easy for me to, it's not easy for me to say at all. The Pharaoh's sunset shell. And it's just magical, isn't it, to actually call something that. And with all this debris, it was an absolute frenzy for the gulls. For days and days, they feasted like I've never seen before. Hundreds and hundreds of black-headed gulls, common gulls, herring gulls, greater blackback gulls, and a smattering of southern moving north Mediterranean gulls feeding amongst them. And then later in the spring, this incredible European flying squid. I've never heard of European flying squid, and it turns out it's our commonest squid. And here it is, lying there sadly again in Farley Bay, but what, just giving us a taste, an insight as to some of the extraordinary creatures that are around us in our marine environment. And if only we could access it and see it more and help safeguard it. And it makes the importance of marine protected areas so much more evident. And little jewel amongst them all, probably the most unlikely of all the findings in the storm debris, a golden seahorse, Hippocampus plasticus, which incredibly had been turned out in China. And what made it even more remarkable is when we actually found a living fossil next to it, nearby, in this incredible Triceratops plasticus, also came originating in China as well. And it's just amazing what you can find on the beach if you search enough. But inland, it was a different story. In our garden, for the first time in many a time, it was completely white over with snow after the storm. And the pond was frozen solid. And yet here, at the start of February, you look through the ice, and these are photographs actually taken through the layer of ice on the surface of the pond. And there are great crested newts, common frogs, palmate newts, incredible, just carrying on as if nothing's happened, oblivious of the ice and weather above them. And not only that, but the great crested newts are actually displaying, with the male here with his white flash along his tail and spectacularly marked feet, flicking its tail, flicking pheromones towards the female, trying to attract her so that hopefully she'll mate with him. And it was just incredible to see in those conditions. And also seeing the caddisfly larvae, Limnephalus. And this is sort of unique amongst the caddisflies because this particular little family of caddisflies, all the bits that they build, bits of vegetation they use to build their protective case, are laid transversely across the body rather than along it. So a very, very different feel to them. And I was researching a little bit about them because it's something I knew so little about. And I was absolutely staggered to find out that caddisfly are named after caddis men, Elizabethan street hawkers who used to sell lace and brocade and attach it to their coat, sell it. And so using that information, there was incredible Victorian biologists named caddisflies as a mirror of that sort of behavior. And I'm just reminded that an American jeweler has actually started producing earrings made of caddisfly cases by actually putting fragments of jewels in a pool, allowing the caddisfly to stick them all together with bulk, and then making them into jewelry. Absolutely ridiculous. It was great. But finally, by mid-March, we had nocturnal temperatures going up to 10 degrees for the first time. It's been a cold, cold winter this year, and into the spring and early summer as well. And it's one of the latest years I can remember since we moved here for frog spawning. But in the middle of March, finally, we got the first frog spawn. And as soon as they started spawning, the newts appeared in absolute abundance. Palmate newt, it's like the stunning male palmate newt with his webbed hind feet and pinpoint tip to his tail. An absolutely magnificent creature. And you could see 20, 30, 40 palmate newts gathered around the patches of frog spawn. And we thought they were using it as some sort of mating ritual at first and just as a collection point, some sort of lek. And then we realized what was really going on. It was carnage, absolute carnage. The newts were just tearing into the frog spawn and eating the freshly laid frog spawn eggs in gulps, ripping them out until the whole thing was half depleted by the end of a couple of days. I've never seen anything quite like it. And against this backdrop at this time of year, we're now getting towards the spring equinox. My only sort of concession to migration was the backdrop of our singing male blackbirds, waking each morning to that incredible dawn chorus, but also being amazed at the sheer number of blackbirds in the bushes around the gap, and then realizing the significance of it one evening. As it got towards dusk, the chatter of blackbirds occurred as always and just started to go calm. And as it went calm, the first and the seeps increasing till almost a frenzy. And then slowly, one blackbird rose from the gap into the moonlit night sky, getting higher and higher. Another followed, another and another. 20, 30, 40, 50 blackbirds rose out of the gap in front of our eyes in the night sky, highlighted by the moonlight as they headed southeast towards Flamborough at the start of their journey, crossing the North Sea in the westerly winds. An absolutely fantastic sight that I know Mark will have picked up in his recordings without any doubt whatsoever, that these amazing night movements of so many of our migrants. And it was wonderful juxtaposition to see our own breeding birds singing, displaying, nesting at exactly the same time as our continental blackbird visitors were starting to make their long migration flight back across the North Sea. And at the same time, the blackthorn was bursting into bloom. And it struck me as you look at the gap, as if it's half covered in snow, every other tree bare, apart from this staggering, sweet-smelling blackthorn blossom. How extraordinary. Why are blackthorns in flower now when everything else isn't? And why do they flower before their leaves? Whereas that other abundant tree in the gap, hawthorn, flowers after its leaves have been born. And it turns out that this is called hysteranthus. And hysteranthus is the flowers appearing before the leaves. And it's a hedge betting strategy, which is a good thing for a blackthorn if you think about it. That's just a little play on words there. It's what it's actually doing is getting out first so that any day-flying insects that are around will be attracted to it, will see it and can pollinate, cross-pollinate it. But alternatively, if there are very few insects around because it's too cold, then there are no leaves in the way and wind pollination can operate. So a hedge betting strategy. In contrast, hawthorn, conservative approach, holds back, waits until early May, middle of May, until all the leaves are out. And then when the temperatures have warmed and there's a much higher number of potential pollinators around, blast the air with its blossom and smell with little chance of wind pollination, but a high chance of attracting any insect pollinators that are around. So fascinating strategies going on in our plant and tree life. And at this time, same time of year, I was asked if I'd like to analyse some 200 barn owl pellets that had been taken from a local barn owl roost in the winter. And so it's a fantastic opportunity, not realising quite what had taken on. And I should just thank Steve Race for just letting me use that stunning photograph. I'm so jealous of it. This is more like my sort of photograph though. And here we've got a typical barn owl pellets and just some of the 700 small mammal skulls that were found in those barn owl pellets. It's absolutely extraordinary, the complete range of small mammals that we've found. And this, the commonest, most abundant, with over 50% all the prey items taken by our local barn owls were short-tailed field voles. And not surprising when you think where barn owls are hunting, it's perfect short-tailed field vole habitat. And there they are. The next most common, with over 20-odd%, were common shrews. And it just reminded me how these animals are so abundant, but we virtually never see them. And if you think about common shrew itself, always so active, you hear them squeak, you virtually never see them. And in winter, how on earth do they survive? How can they possibly find enough food to feed and when they're still active? And the answer is they reduce their body size and body weight. They literally reduce the size of their organs, their bones, their mass, and even their brain by up to 25%. So they need less energy and therefore less food to survive. And then as soon as spring appears, they start to grow again, you know, that booming growth to be able to adapt and exploit the new source of food. The third most abundant item were wood mice, with something like 12 to 15% of all the items. And then there was a whole range of bank voles, pygmy shrews, and 3 water shrews. I was absolutely staggered to find water shrew skulls in a farm in the middle of a village near at Reeton, in fact. Where were these barn owls feeding to catch water shrews? And it was interesting that they have been seen at Filey Dams, and they have been seen in 1 or 2 at Bempton Cliffs. And it makes you wonder that they use even the smallest of ditches to transverse across the land and may actually be far more abundant than we realise. But beautiful creatures. And at the end of it all, I mentioned this to Dan Lombard, one of our superb local ecologists. And Dan said, "Did you find any harvest mice?" I said, to be honest, Dan, I'm not even sure I know what to look for. And he said, well, they look like a juvenile wood mouse, but if you look at the front tooth, if you take the front tooth of the upper jaw out, it'll have 5 roots rather than 4. So that, being completely nerdy, I thought, oh, that's great, I'll go and check that out. So I went through all the wood mice skulls and took out the front teeth just to check. And lo and behold, there it was amongst them. One which I thought was a young wood mouse actually turns out to be a harvest mouse. So there are harvest mice somewhere between Reeton and Hunmanby. In my life, it's great what you can discover. And the extraordinary thing about it is those 700 skulls are 700 records. The significance of that is that if I say that the total number of common true records on the biological database, National Biological Database, is 8,500. That there are 3,300 records of water shrew. There's an absolute dearth of knowledge about our British small mammals and their distribution. And every single one of these records can make a difference to sort of expanding our knowledge. We know nothing about them in terms of conservation and population estimates and population trends and sizes. There is so much work to be done. And it just made me think, well, apart from finding what you do with 700 skulls at the end of it all, here's something that you really can make a difference on your doorstep. And it's not just the small mammals that are making a difference, it's the larger ones as well. Lockdown was incredible in so many different ways. This is Hunmanby Gap Beach at the weekend in lockdown in the middle of winter. The only thing on it were two roe deer just strolling across the beach, absolutely oblivious. It was an amazing sight as opposed to the normal views that you get in the fields or lurking in the woodlands. It was a chance to look at the footprints on the beach, you know, that classic footprint on the left, and on the right, a footprint in some of the boulder clay, which actually shows, interesting, the two dew toes of a roe deer. So a roe deer's got two front toes, the middle one's missing, and the hind toes are pushed back up the leg. And only when the roe deer is running or is jumping do you ever see the dew toes, the two hind dew toes. And you can see the little marks in there. You know, just a quirky little thing about when you're looking for tracks and things in the area. And it's most of the time, I think, fantastic to see roe deer. But then there's a downside. And it's not just in the garden where our marsh marigolds perished at the mouths of our local roe deer population, but go into any of the local woodlands now. And it's actually shocking because there are almost no woodland flowers in flower. The bluebells, the wood anemones, most things seem to have been eaten out as the roe deer are trapped inside those woodlands seeking protection during daytime, just constantly browsing. And as a consequence, the field woodland plant population is getting ever more depauperate. And doubtless as a consequence, woodland invertebrates are finding it harder to survive as cover disappears. And if woodland invertebrates are disappearing, then you can guarantee woodland birds will be impacted as well. And so the whole chain starts. And I wouldn't be at all surprised if roe deer and the increase that we're seeing is starting to have an impact on these wider populations. And talking of mammals, even larger mammals, one of the most amazing sights, I think, in the last few years that we've been seeing in Filey Bay and the beach cafe at Hunmanby is a fantastic place to watch them, are the bottlenose dolphins. And it's been fantastic to see them, to watch the behavior, the family parties, and also to track one particular individual. And I know Mark's very familiar with this individual as well. This is Runny Paint. And I haven't got any notes with me, so you'll just have to bear with my memory. But I think it's number 160 something, 161 or something like that on the bottlenose dolphin record system. And we know that this dolphin, with its distinctive white leading edge to the dorsal fin and white look like scarring marks at the base of the dorsal fin, is recognizable with binoculars even at a distance. And this animal was first recorded in the Moray Firth in the 1990s. It left as the Moray Firth population grew, expanded, and dolphins started to disperse. It then turned up at Flamborough, I think in 2013 or something like that for the first time, and has become ever more familiar as time has progressed. So we've got a dolphin here that's often associated with young calves, and it's 24, at least 24 years old, and has been in this area now for 10 years at least. And we have our own sort of dolphin pod that grows and decreases depending on different times of the year, that stretches from Scarborough, Whitby northwards down to Bridlington at least and beyond, and spends most of the time just seem to be going backwards and forwards. And it's just a joy to see. And if anyone's got a copy of the Filey Bird Report, John Harwood's done a great summary of all the sightings in there just for reference. But coming from the large to the small and slightly closer to home, to the garden and the walk down to the beach itself. One of the things that struck me this year is the sheer variety of invertebrates, of insects. And this is the common carder bee. The bees alone are just amazing to look at. The commonest ones, carder bee and buff-tailed bumblebees, are incredible. And then you get these monsters, these red-tailed bumblebees, the red-tailed bumblebee queen that appears as early March and is present throughout the year. And the numbers are swelled by all the workers as the nests increase in size. And whilst I was watching the bumblebees and seeing the importance of gorse bushes in particular, and how important the gorse flowers are as a source of nectar and pollen for these creatures, I started to suddenly realise it's not just the bees. The hoverfly Volucella bombilans is a red-tailed bumblebee mimic. And guess what? It can enter a red-tailed bumblebee's nest with immunity, it would seem, lay its eggs inside the nest, the young hatch, and feed and almost act like cleaners within the red-tailed bumblebee nest. Absolutely extraordinary. How do they do that from a creature that would be so aggressive to most other creatures if it tried to sort of walk into its nest? Is it a pheromone? Just absolutely fascinating. And another an incredible creature. This is a canopied fly. And I've noticed several of these now in the gap. And this is the commonest one, the yellow-legged bee grabber. It's called yellow-legged bee grabber because it's got yellow legs and it grabs bees. And it's an incredible creature because if you look at the end of the abdomen, it's got an organ that's described as the equivalent of a can opener. And this fly sits around on flowers, feeding, waiting for a red-tailed bumblebee to appear. When she appears, the fly waits for its moment, dives at the bumblebee, rips a slit into the abdomen of the bumblebee using the tin opener, and then lays a single egg inside the slit. The egg within a day hatches, and the larvae slowly starts to feed inside the abdominal cavity of the red-tailed bumblebee, growing and growing and growing, until eventually it fills the entire abdominal cavity. Not surprisingly, the bumblebee dies and falls to the ground and provides protection then for the larvae of the fly to pupate inside the dead bumblebee before eventually emerging. This is going on in our gardens. It's absolutely incredible. It's better than watching television and horror films and science fiction. Just look at this. This is a ferruginous bee grabber. It's one of the most grotesque creatures I've ever seen in my life. But it's got its own beauty as well. And it's out there searching out a bumblebee near you. And the bumblebee, one bumblebee it might be searching for is this one. This is the garden bumblebee. This is the grey seal of the bumblebee world, with its hoarse head compared to the delicate heads of the buff-tailed bumblebees, much more like a common seal. This garden bumblebee's got this huge, great big tongue that you can see hanging from the base of its head. And it's a fantastic creature, slightly ungainly compared to the others, but it's there in our gardens, a common thing. And when I was searching for these bees, I discovered this creature, and this is Barbett's cuckoo bee. I didn't know what it was at first. I just knew it was different and got some advice and from the experts and confirmed it was Barbett's cuckoo bee. Barbett's cuckoo bee is exactly as the name suggests, a cuckoo. It's a parasite, and it's a parasite of garden bumblebees. And this is a female Barbett's cuckoo bee. She walks into a garden bumblebee nest, kills the queen, replaces her, and starts laying eggs that the worker bees of the garden bumblebee then look after and nurse and feed as if they were their own. And she wanders off and finds and seeks out another nest to do the same. Extraordinary strategy, extraordinary intrigue and subterfuge going on in our own gardens. After all this time looking at bees, I'd still not found a honeybee. And so when the meadowsweet came out, I was staggered to see honeybees all across the meadowsweet. not seen one all spring. And then suddenly in the height of summer, there they are feeding on meadowsweet, stunning pale, dark form and pale form honeybees, and their mimics, the dronefly. Again, everywhere you look, stuff's going on. Down below them, tawny mining bees, small bees digging little holes in single solitary bee nests. And here, attracting the dark-edged bee fly with this stunning long, harmless proboscis. These are incredible creatures. You just watch them and they could be bees that look at that proboscis. And what they're actually doing is searching out, when they're not taking nectar from primroses and the like, and nest sites of the tawny mining bees. And once the female finds that entrance and she realizes, she sprays the area around the entrance with eggs. The eggs hatch, the little larval maggots crawl into the nest and clean out the contents of the nest. Incredible. And then it doesn't stop there either. This absolute jewel is a minute ruby-tailed wasp. Millimetre for millimetre, it's got the longest sting of any of our wasps. And it's common in the gap and around us. And this time it also parasitizes mining bees. And the female goes into the nest. She's got this incredibly hard jeweled cuticle. The bees can attack her and it makes no difference. She can lay her eggs and the larvae hatch. And sure enough, they eat everything in sight. And it doesn't stop there either, because when you look at the angelica that's coming out, you start to search what's feeding on the pollen. You come across this alien creature, Gasteruption. Gasteruption, what a jaculator. What a fantastic name. And Gasteruption jaculator is an ichneumon wasp. As I say, it looks like some sort of space alien. And look at that ovipositor with white-tipped ovipositor. What on earth does it use it for? It uses it when the female goes into a mining bee's nest, finds an active cell, it pierces the nest cell with the grub inside it, and lays an egg inside the grub, inside the nest cell, which then hatches out, eats from inside the grub, and then devours the contents of the cell as well. Life's a bit tough out there. And but meanwhile, on the cliff tops, the soft cliff tops, we're now into sort of May, and we've got this incredible emergence of these flies that anybody who knows this part of the coast will recognize. This is a St. Mark's fly, and St. Mark's is meant to be the 25th of April, and the 25th of April is when the St. Mark's flies are meant to perform. In reality, this spring, it was about 2.5 weeks later, just reflecting how cold it's been. And there's an absolute synchronous mass emergence of all the St. Mark's flies. And they all seek the highest point around, which is the highest point on the cliffs in our case. And if you're stood on the cliff, your head will become the highest point. And the St. Mark's flies will there and they'll dance. This is a male dancing to try and attract a female. The female's coming with their dark wings, and mating can occur within seconds. And it's an amazing sight to just be amongst these hundreds of thousands of St. Mark's flies. With so many there, naturally many don't quite make it. Here's one that died and has been dragged to the nest by a black ant, barely half the size of the St. Mark's fly. Stunning creatures, ants. Thousands and thousands end up in spiders' webs, providing food for the spiders. And here we are on the soft cliffs themselves. And the soft cliffs are just incredible, unspoiled wilderness. Walk amongst the soft cliffs and you're walking on unspoiled land. This is the lichen cladonia, like hedgehogs just covering whole areas. The slightest pressure on those just crushes them. And they're incredible things to see. You go there, you're the first person to ever walk on that piece of cliff. And just incredible to think that. And when you look closely, you realize that what lichens are. Lichens are fundamentally fungal structures that support colonies of algae. And you can see the algae in this photograph, the little sort of giraffe-like patches that cover the fungal hyphae, that together are two totally separate species that together form a unique species of lichen. And when you look around you, lichens are everywhere. They're just magical, and we ignore them 90% of the time. They're better than any garden flower display when you look at the detail and the breeding parts. And I'd recommend to anyone just to try exploring the lichens that you can see around where you are. And we're not the only ones enjoying the lichens. The lights which are in the gap use lichens to actually protect their nest. and they use spider's web to actually bind them. And together they build this extraordinary camouflage cryptic nest that allows, as the brood get bigger and bigger, the nest can expand out. It's almost like a hummingbird nest, as the flexibility that the spider's web gives to it, and under that protection of the lichen cover. Sadly, so many of these early long-tailed tick nests fail to the predations of magpies and others, but they invariably come back for a second attempt, and they seem to be far more successful. And on the cliffs themselves, the wildflowers, my favourite of all of them, the grass of Parnassus, a stunning flower with its pseudo-nectarines, these little false nectar adaptations in the flower that look fantastic for insects, but when they get there, it's just a lure to get them in to sort of pollinate. And the orchids that appear on the soft cliffs, the pyramidal orchids, the fragrant orchids, and some of the more unusual flowers, cotton grass. I never expected to see cotton grass here growing on the chalk cliffs, for goodness sakes. It's a plant that's home on the acid moorland, and it's a plant that is the core food of this moth, Howard's minor. And I was absolutely staggered to find Howard's minor in our garden this summer, when it should be on a blanket bog somewhere near you in the Pennines or the Peak District. A remarkable thing to see. And it's not just moths there, the butterflies, marbled whites, colonies scattered along the soft cliffs. One near Reason with over 50 or 60 marble whites showing, feeding on fescue. Speckled woods everywhere amongst the trees, defending sunlight patches, males waiting for females to drift in to attract and do their dance and mate with them. Skippers large and small, the males with their little black mark on the wings, scales that have been adapted to form a sex mark gland that can be used to lure females and attract females. And the even more moth-like dingy skipper that makes the cliffs one of its homes, and a fantastic thing to see on any spring, early summer morning in bright sunshine. And a moth that looks more like a butterfly, the burnet companion, one of the many day-flying moths that inhabit these cliffs. And perhaps the jewel amongst all of them, the green tiger beetle. It should be called the green cheetah beetle, because to watch them feed with those huge jaws is extraordinary. They just wait, and then suddenly there's a dart and a move, and they've grabbed any passing insect that comes too near, and the speed of move, you can barely even see it happen. Fantastic creatures on our doorstep at Hunmanby Gap. And coming even right home into the garden, we now realise our garden is a little piece of cliff-top grassland that's been left over. Perhaps 100 years it's been there, and it's developed and evolved as a cliff-top piece of grassland. And so we leave it uncut from May onwards. And this 500, just counting them was remarkable in itself, spikes of common orchid, and amongst them a single spike of bee orchid, a little piece of magic. Sad that every single bee orchid in Britain has to pollinate itself, because this incredible bee mimicry is for a species that only lives on the continent. But then, nestling amongst all those orchids, 3 spikes of adder's tongue, a small fern indicative of ancient grassland, and a treasure within our garden. And this little area creates wonderful habitat for common green grasshoppers. The natural honeysuckle that grows around it becomes a haven for marmalade hoverflies. And this spring, I think we had this summer, sorry, we had an invasion, a migration involving tens of thousands of marmalade hoverflies coming into the country from Europe, hitting the East Coast, and just filling every space, including our conservatory. And then at night, you run a moth trap twice a week, and you just get beauties here on our doorstep. This fantastic puss moth, the adults feeding on willow and poplar, the drinker moths, like some sort of teddy bear from a shop, just fantastic creatures. The big woolly tigers that we see wandering across the cliff tops just before pupation, and beautifully cryptic green silver lines, or dingy, almost instantly forgettable winter moths. Except winter moths on a cold, frosty night, when you look outside, just look carefully against the moonlight. You can often see winter moths flying around, temperatures of -5, -6 degrees, and they're flying everything else has stopped. And the winter moth comes into its own, the male winter moth. It actually produces a form of alcohol that acts as an antifreeze that's been used in commercial research to enable it to fly in these conditions. And this is the male, and it's searching for a female, which is completely flightless. And then there's the peppered moth. I can't believe it, the peppered moth. This is like going back to O-level biology, for goodness sakes. This is Darwinism in action, natural selection. And here at Hunmanby Gap, the common form of poplar moth is this very perfectly camouflaged against the lichen-covered rocks. Back in Sheffield, this was the common form, the melanic form, that was perfectly camouflaged against the soot and grime-covered trees and rocks of the city itself. And now, I virtually never see them. Interestingly, the same story is true of Sheffield as the air's been cleaned. And I was in the doctor's surgery for a brief visit to do an annual health check. I was actually allowed to go in there despite COVID being around, a rare treat. And when I was in the doctor's surgery, it's not another person, of course, apart from a vapor moth caterpillar walking across one of the chairs. And I picked it up, and the kind receptionist gave me a little specimen tube to put it in so I could bring it home, let it pupate. And a few weeks later, this stunning creature emerged, a common moth in the gap, especially in the autumn when the males are flying around searching for flightless females with these amazing eyes at the rear of the wing, a distraction for any predator that can hopefully then allow the moth to escape. A moth, another moth which is common in the garden, elephant hawk moth, feeding on the rosebay willow herb in the gap, a stunning creature. And look at that larvae, the caterpillar. No wonder it's called an elephant hawk moth. It's literally an elephant's trunk, isn't it? With giant eyes on it again, though, to distract any would-be predator, snake-like. And then another hawk moth, the eyed hawk moth. It's camouflage, you touch it, the back flicks up, the hind wings flick up, and these incredible eyes appear, staring at any would-be predator. Similarly, a convolvulus hawk moth, the size of a small bat, a migrant moth from Europe, and just look on its back. They are stunning. Those eyes, those markings, they're going to distract any predator that comes near it, especially with a hissing sound that goes alongside it. And as I get towards the end, just this taster of some of the wildlife of Hunmanby Gap, we've got a common wasp nest in the house roof, and we debated about it long and hard. And we thought, no, we've got to let them survive. And we put little bits of curtain over the windows so we could open the windows without getting the wasps in. And it's been a fantastic thing to have done. Just if you look at that common wasp on the right, look at that line of wood. It's peeled off, chewed off our garden bench, absolutely destroying our garden bench, but it's worth it because it's creating paper to use to build a nest. And unbelievably, 2,000 years ago, a Chinese man was watching wasps doing exactly this and thought, I'll try that. And he started to mold and use the mulch to make rudimentary paper. And it was the first paper produced by man, inspired by wasps. And whilst watching the wasps, I was taking photographs. I noticed suddenly this huge thing appear on the window nearby. I thought it was a hornet. It was literally a monster. And I eventually looked at it and worked it out. It was a hornet hoverfly. And its distribution is very southern, spreading north. And in fact, one or two have been seen in Filey and at Hunmanby in the last couple of years. And here was one in our wasp nest. The incredible thing is, they're called hornet hoverflies because they mimic hornets, but they actually use wasps as a wasp nest as a host. And this was a female. She came and landed at the entrance of the wasp nest. The wasp came and looked at it, curious, ignored it. And then she just strolled into the nest. And lo and behold, inside the nest, she lays her eggs, the eggs hatch, and the larvae act like the Volucella bombolans, the red-tailed bumblebee host, and they clean out the nest. All the frass and the debris and things gets cleaned up by the larvae of the hornet hoverfly. And there it was, happening in our house in front of us. And on that same wall, a zebra jumping spider, absolutely extraordinary little spider, Salticus, a family called Salticus. Salticus means dancing in Latin. And this is a dancing spider. The male performs this incredible elaborate dance around the female and has these wonderful, all spiders have these 8 eyes. And you can see the front eyes are enlarged to create this wonderful binocular vision. And they can use that to make a judgment that allows them to jump 14 times the length of their body to catch prey, and they stealthily stalk like a cat when you watch them, and then suddenly pounce. It's all over in a split second, and something else falls victim to the jumping spider. Unlike the garden spider, which build those amazing webs around the garden. And this autumn, I was watching them and watching how they construct them and how they sit in the middle of the webs in the morning. I flushed a crane fly, a tipulid, into the heart of the web, unintentionally. The spider shot out, bit it, paralyzed it with its neurotoxin, and then switched to starting to wrap around it. And if you look at the spinneret, the spider's producing a different type of web, which it's using to wrap around the fly than it's using to actually hang on to the web. And the spinneret's a staggering structure. It allows the protein that produces the web to come out comes out, and as it does, it goes through the equivalent of an acid bath that hardens it instantly, producing one of the strongest known fibers known to man, and that's the spider's web fiber. And it can produce up to 5 different types of web, depending on what the need is. Incredible pieces of engineering. And it just wrapped up the crane fly within a couple of minutes, cut it out of the web, and carried it up to its nest, where it then injected it with enzymes to dissolve its body contents so it could make a wonderful fly soup for its dinner. Talking of flies, daddy long-legged flies. Look at spiders. Look at that daddy long-legged spider or skull spider. They're everywhere in our house. It's a nightmare if you any sort of sense of house pride. But it's fantastic if you're just a bit of an ecologist and you can sort of keep a few around sneakily so you can actually watch them. The skull spider, just look at that head. So aptly named. And unbelievable because they look so harmless. They don't bite you, they can't do anything to you. And yet here's one, actually it's caught and killed a house spider, one of those great big monsters that we see. And just fantastic creatures, but sadly impacting to the point that the house spider is now becoming quite a rare spider, certainly in our house, because of the numbers of daddy long-legged spiders. I used to think daddy long-legs included harvestmen, but I now know better. Harvestmen are different. They're like sort of more related to scorpions and mites than they are to spiders. And when you look more closely, just look at that. A fused abdomen, thorax, one pair of eyes on a little sort of raised area, and just unbelievable. It's no wonder spiders, arachnids, were related to crustaceans, crabs and the like many, many millions of years ago. That could almost be a crab. And then I found this harvestman as well, I can't even say it, Dicranopalpus, the Zorro harvestman, because it has this black mass that runs across its eyes and these forked palps. And I was incredible to find out that this was first found in Britain in 1957. That means I'm sharing a house with a harvestman that's been in Britain exactly the same amount of time as I have. It's just ridiculous. And then it gets even more bizarre because this is a scorpion fly. These are stunning creatures. The scorpion fly, the male, takes a gift from a spider's web, risking its life, taking prey out of the spider's web to present to a female, because the female will only mate with him if she's feeding. So he has to present this gift. And the better the gift, the more chance he has of successful mating. And what a creature. You can't invent it, can you? As a child, if you tried to create some alien monster, that's it. Oh, and I could go on forever, but I'm going to just whip through now and just show you these because I'm already running massively over time. But the pond is such a source of joy. Azure damselflies emerging, emerald damselflies mating, blue-tailed damselflies egg-laying, and 90% of them ending up as food to feed our resident tree sparrows. It's a tricky call, but the tree sparrows, the population's crashed by 90-odd% across most of the country. We've got to do something to protect and safeguard these incredible birds. And there's sadly a little bit of collateral damage with the loss of these beautiful, wonderful little damselflies. And the tree sparrows thrive because they time their young to be in the nest at a time when they can exploit these resources. And so having a pond or water source for a tree sparrow is an absolute boom for the territory. And there we are, just gorging its youngsters. There's also larger damselflies, emperor dragonflies, females, split a piece of vegetation, inject the eggs into it, and the contrast to the skimmers, black-tailed skimmer, and the female here does a totally different strategy, just scatters her eggs across the water, and they float until they eventually attach to something, and it's different. And then the larvae, just look at get inside that pond and look at the larvae, look at the different creatures in there. It's a magical world. And if you look at the photo on the left, that's the underside of a common darter nymph. Look at the front, at the head, and look at that mechanism below the jaw. That's a hinged lobe that shoots out the length of the actual lobe that you can see. And the jaws and mandibles are on the front of it and can grab anything. And the force of that can actually knock the nymph back. It's so powerful. Anything walking within sort of a few centimeters that hasn't got a chance. They're incredible creatures. And semaphore flies, what can I say? Natural England needed a competition to try and get people inspired about British wildlife. And one of the species that came through, people were asked to give an English name to an insect that only had a scientific Latin name. So, Poelcelabophorus nobilatus, you are now known as the semaphore fly, and it's the perfect name. Look on any slow-moving water or pond, and you'll see these flies in May and June. The white wingtips flashing of the males, trying to attract the attention of a female. His wings then blur as he undertakes a 180-degree switch upside down over the female, landing on his feet on the opposite side of the female with one of the fastest maneuvers known in science by any living creature. You can't even see it. You literally can't even see it happen. You're trying to work out what happened. It's incredible. Now we're getting to the end of the season and up to date now, and just into September. And all of a sudden, St. Mark's flies in April and have suddenly gone. And now we've been replaced. We've been attacked by red ants everywhere. And these are the red ant, Myrmica ruginolis, and these are males, and they're seeking the highest, they breed on the soft cliffs, and at this time of year, they all come to the top of the cliff on a nice sunny day, they all start flying, waiting for a queen to appear, and they all come to the highest point. And so for me, it was the top of my head, which was absolutely covered in red ants. Luckily, this type of red ant doesn't bite, and so it was a pleasure to put up with it for a short time. And last of all, the back to the sea where we started. I love to know the sea. I go swimming in the sea so often with a snorkel on the blind hope one day the sea will be clear enough to actually see anything rather than just sand and mud. And so I miss most of what's out there. But then recently I went out with one of my family members who was a fanatical fisherman. And in the way that I think about birds and wildlife, he thinks about fish. And he worked out that if he goes down to the shoreline at dark and follows the tide in from low tide and casts into beyond the waves, he might have his best chance of catching fish. And so I went down with him just to experience it, and it was stunning. This is a painting by David Mitchell of sea bass, and talk about capture the magic. They were there in those waves, and you could see them in the moonlight glistening as they darted through the breaking waves, trying to catch smaller fish. And they also made a fantastic meal. It seems sad they were eating, but beautiful, beautiful fish to eat. And there seemed to be plenty of them. And we also caught whiting with these ferocious little teeth. And there were dozens and dozens of them. The big question was, with so many predatory fish, what are they eating on at night? So I went down with my torch while Ian's catching our breakfast and checked all the little pools that were being fed by water and found dozens and dozens of lesser sand eels, dozens of brown shrimps, and this staggering little creature, of which there were thousands, of speckled sea louse, Eurydice pulchra, pulchra meaning beautiful. And how can something that's a millimetre across, that gives you a nasty little nip when you're paddling in the sea, can even fetch blood, how can that be something so beautiful that I've never even seen before in my life? And the ecology of it all, the food chain, is opening up in front of your eyes in that moonlit night on the beach with the entire food chain appearing. And the very last thing, the highlights of migration in the last week before I disappeared off to Scotland and got ill. teal. Fantastic. These birds have come from the furthest most reaches of Russia. They've come down the Baltic Sea, they've flown across the North Sea, and they've come to Filey and Hunmanby Gap and Flamborough. And nearly 1,000 of them just flew past the gap, collecting in the bay briefly before moving on their journey. Pink-footed geese, what a magical sight. Flying back from Iceland, heading back south. Will Scott, up at the farm overlooking Hunmanby Gap, counted 10,000 in a day. Absolutely incredible numbers of geese migrating all the way from Iceland and Greeceland, hitting the east coast, moving down to the Humber estuary and off to Norfolk. And it's an annual ritual to watch it. And I got an amazing phone call. I was out on the beach with Claire on our little beach walk, and Will rang to say, there's an osprey over your house, there's an osprey over your house. And I got my binoculars and looked up, and sure enough, it was there, a little dot, an osprey flying over the house. And incredibly, Will then said over whilst we're on the phone, there's two. And I looked and I could see the second osprey. And it was just a fantastic moment to look back. And it captured everything that's special about where we live. And I looked at the photograph when I got back, and I don't know if you can see it, but there's like faint grey scribbles across the sky. And whilst we were getting excited watching those two ospreys, we completely ignored and didn't even recognise that there were hundreds of pink-footed geese migrating in V's and lines beyond, in the distance, beyond the ospreys. It just captures everything that migration, everything that the wildlife of Hunmanby Gap is all about. And finally, a great white egret and a crane in the same photograph. A once-in-a-lifetime experience. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Keith. Would you be good enough to unshare your screen?
There we are.
Thank you very much, sir.
We're done.
I'm going to let you take a slurp of liquid and just
indeed
watching and enjoying. We've had loads of messages throughout just saying how much people have enjoyed that. Yeah, just fantastic. I mean, as far as as far as your experience goes, I mean, it's incredible the sort of breadth and depth of your kind of natural history knowledge at the Gap. Is that something that, is that a result of retirement or the place or both?
The passion's always been there, Mark, but it's always been constrained by time. And so when you were working heavily, just living the job, there just wasn't the time to sort of do it. So retirement, it took me a while to get adjusted to a retirement. I loved work, and I found the break from it. It's crazy, isn't it? Most people give their right arm to retire. And I was like, oh God, what's it doing to me? But I think I've realised it's done, it's given me time, it's given me space, time and space with Claire, time and space to actually be out there where I live, just appreciating the absolute variety of and richness of stories that are all around us in the everyday. And so it's given me a chance to sort of resurrect those early sort of passions about that wildlife and to learn so much, because so much of what I've spoken about tonight has been new, and right. It's a whole different world to discover. And I think it's whoever's listening, wherever you are, when you do get the time, that's there for every one of us to discover. And I think if we can do that, and if we can sort of record what we find and get those records in as well, then it gives us more information ultimately to take sort of serious action to help conserve and protect this ever decreasing biodiversity.
I was going to ask you about that actually, as far as recording goes, because as you rightly say, the wonderful thing about natural history is it's basically there for everybody, even if you've got a small yard, or even if you're at school, whatever, there's always biodiversity to enjoy. But as you rightly point out, such a fundamental part of it is recording in order to increase our knowledge and to inform conservation decisions, etc. How do you record?
For all my bird records, automatically go onto Trek Telling, and that goes on to bird track. So they all goes into national databases, and I hope bird track goes on to the national database, the NBN. That this winter, on those quiet, dark nights, I'm going to be spending time putting all these records that I've been talking about and all the identified photographs I've taken to get the photographs verified, because obviously I'm a novice. It's new to me. I'm bound to have made mistakes. Even tonight, I realised that one of the fish I identified was wrong, and I've corrected it just in time for the talk. But that's all about learning. It's about making mistakes, and it's getting the information, the photographs and the information out there. And one of the joys of social media now is that a lot of the recording systems, iNature, iRecord, the NBN, so many of them allow your photographs to be seen by real experts who can say, that's wrong, that's rubbish, kick it out, or that's great, we'll have that one. That makes a difference. So this winter, I'll be sitting down, working out what's the best way to record all the different types of things that I've seen and send photographs in with them to get that expert endorsement, really. Excellent.
Right, we've got a couple more minutes and a couple of questions. Mike Cole, hi Mike. In reference to visible migration, as it happens, so which you touched upon in the talk, but didn't dwell upon. Anybody who's seen your visible migration talks will know it's a magical thing and very very special at the Gap. Mike says, when you're monitoring Vismic, how are you identifying the birds? Visual, sound, or behaviour?
Yeah, it's a very good point, Mike. Interestingly, when I went to the doctors this year, I was diagnosed as having starts of cataract, so I'm identifying them a lot more confidently than I used to, which is a real pain. But when you go out with someone like Will Scott, who's young and got eyes as sharp as a razor, it's an absolute joy, because Will just sees the birds and then you can get onto them and then you can have a go at it. But I use sight fundamentally, and because my eyes aren't as good as they used to be, I now scan all the time with binoculars and telescope. I'm not relying, as when I was younger, I'd just wait to see birds. You miss so much if you just do that. So I'm constantly scanning and looking to compensate for my deteriorating eyes. But I also am lucky enough to be able to keep sharp hearing and just learning the bird calls and trying to pick them up at a distance. You can hear them sort of quarter of a mile away sometimes, and if the wind's calm and right, half a mile even, possibly. And you want to be sort of doing it with other people so that you can be testing each other. What's that call? Is it such and such or such and such? And if it's wrong, it actually doesn't matter, because as it gets closer and closer, you work it out between you, and eventually it clicks. And each season you almost have to learn it again, and it comes back faster and faster the more you do. And I just recommend everybody to, if you're with somebody who's also passionate about it and enjoying wildlife, just test each other a little bit for fun and try and work out what things are before you know what they are. Just do a bit of helping each other.
It's interesting you should say that, because Mike also is a follow-up question, which you've kind of just answered brilliantly, is Mike says, I wish to improve my birding skills. What can you advise? And I think a big part of that is mentors or peer group support, isn't it?
Absolutely, Mark. That one of the worst things in the world, I think, is going out when you're young and you're passionate, or old and passionate, and you want to learn, and you get there and you meet some grumpy old whatever. I haven't got the time of day for you. And I understand that some people...
Surely not, Keith. Surely not.
It isn't a social thing. But actually, I think being able to go out with somebody who's going to prepare to help and just listen and share a bit of their knowledge, and they'll learn from you as well, because you'll see things differently and hear things differently, and together you can go on and learn. And one of the joys about Hunmanby Gap is we developed a little group of people. It's open to anybody to come along to. There's Nick Carter, Paul Scanlon, there's Will Scott, and others come down as well, and everyone can just drop in whenever they want. And if we're down there, everybody just mixes in and helps, and it's all about learning together. No one's the expert, but together as a team, we've got lots of eyes, we've got lots of ears. You can make a difference, and I think that's the best way possible to learn. For me personally,
I think that's an absolutely perfect way to close, Keith. That's wonderful advice. I just want to thank you on behalf of everybody. We've got loads of people watching this evening, loads of messages of appreciation, especially under your circumstances. You don't look like you're flagging, but I'm sure you are. Exactly. You'll just flop when we're off.
Mark. Yeah.
But it really has been wonderful, Keith. It's been eye-opening for me. Just the different areas of natural history, absolutely on your doorstep, wherever you are. I think that's just like, it's been fascinating, and I'm sure it's inspired a lot of people, to start looking a little harder and a little more carefully at what's around us. And thank you so much for your time, Keith. Much appreciated. Really great. Just to close up, folks, once again, just to plug our charity this year, which is the wonderful St. Catherine's Hospice. I'm sure Keith will join me in recommending throwing a few coins in our virtual bucket, which you can find. Thank you, mate. Yeah, which you can find at justgiving.com/Migweek21, justgiving.com/Migweek21. If you enjoy any of our talks, any of our walks, any of our events, they're all free, as you know, and we'd love it if you contribute via those means. So yeah, loads going on. The conditions are fantastic. As you were talking, Keith, there were red wings outside. I've got an open window recording them, so it was a lovely mix. Get out tomorrow, people. There's loads going on the Yorkshire coast. There's loads that we're doing, and we look forward to seeing you. We'll see you again here tomorrow night for a fantastic talk from Dawn Balmer about tracking our migrant birds. So it's all good, and we'll see you tomorrow. Thanks again, Keith. Much appreciated.
And thank you, Mark. Thank you, everybody, for listening, bearing with me. Yeah, cheers.